it been?
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to... Wait, set 2 is next week? Seriously? So, I don't know. Overdress is pretty cool. At least, I think so. I've been enjoying it a lot. I've been enjoying it so much so that I have competed in not 1, but 2 tournaments that I was invited to over the past several weeks, namely the Content Creator Clash and the Cardfight Con Invitational. And even though I totally scrubbed out of both events, I still had a really good time, and I got to meet and play people that I haven't gotten the chance to play before, and it was a lot of fun. The Cardfight Con tournament especially was a ton of fun, mainly just because it took place over 2 days, and it was really cool just to kind of get to play with some people that hadn't had the chance to. It was a lot of fun, and I would totally do it again if I was to be offered the invitation again. Thank you very much to both of those tournaments for having me. I enjoyed it a lot. Also, side note, they gave me this really sick mat with some insanely awesome art of Virina and Trickstar by Vishap. I really hope I'm saying that correctly. Either way, I'll link it all down below. Go show them some love. Now, I figured now would be the perfect time for me to be able to talk about my favorite deck in the standard metagame right now, both my favorite ride line and my favorite deck. Just between the play style and the aesthetics, I love it so much. And that's Baromagnes. It's just probably my #1 favorite deck right now. Bruce is a very close second though. Never would have expected to be a Dark States main in Overdress, but you know what? Here we are. Nirvana and Bastion are up there as well, and those are mainly the main decks that I've been playing, and at least until Premium gets a ban list, and I will not stop talking about it until we get it, Overdress is where I've been having most of my fun outside of my typical casual Premium games. So I wanted to just kind of take a look and some time to talk about my favorite deck in the format, look at where the deck is right now, and the different directions you can take it going forward with set 2. First, I wanted to just kind of look at where the deck is now, and this is my current list that I played in those past 2 tournaments. This is something of an in-between the kind of slower and turbo builds, I would say, and I kind of just ended up playing Baro more like a tempo deck than a rush to 15 soul type deck. Basically, if I could rush and get to 15 soul, great. If I couldn't though, I felt just as confident and comfortable playing this list. It just was unfortunate that in my games I ended up getting totally order flooded in the latter half of the game and just couldn't guard things, but that's Vanguard. That's how it happens, right? So I don't think there's much in the way of things too interesting here. Maybe the 1 less copy of Baromagnes. I know there were some builds floating around where they only ran 1 Persona ride. That just felt like too few because I definitely did like what Persona riding brought to the table, but I also didn't want to have to cut in on any of my soul charging pieces. Thankfully, that is less of an issue going forward with set 2. Other interesting things you might find is that the fronts over the draws. Personally, I am not a fan of decking out, so I've been definitely favoring fronts in Baromagnes, especially with their higher shield value, because you can be rushed very easily in Baromagnes, and sure, a draw nets you an extra card, but the fact that fronts are worth literally 3 times as much shield, unless that draw is getting you in a very important piece, it just doesn't seem as worth it in my opinion, especially if you have my luck. The other thing is probably a very high count of Crawl You Insects. I really like this card just for the simple fact of the matter that with Baro already getting plus 10k every time he swings, as long as you're at the 10 soul, having Crawl You Insects basically helped this deck simulate Persona ride turns even without Persona riding and even going first. So if you were able to go first and get up to your 15 soul, you're just pushing for damage and numbers, and it's really great. Also, running the actual Dark States over trigger. I know some people have found favor using the Cray Elemental one, and I can see why. Checking it on a 15 soul turn where you call out 2 cards from soul and being able to slap 100 million power on both, it's pretty good. But again, knowing my luck, that never really happens, and I'm probably more likely to see that one on my grade 1 and grade 2 turns where it does next to nothing. I definitely favor the Dark States one because it just has more opportunity to be useful. At least the Dark States one, if I see it on that 15 soul turn when I'm multi-attacking, great. Get a 3rd crit and extra power and 100 million I can slap on one of my rear guards. If I see it on my grade 1 or 2 turns, also great because then I have it for the rest of the game. So I feel like the Craylement one may be better in Bruce. I know I see it in Bruce a lot, but again, with my luck, I definitely just favor this one just because it has more opportunities to be useful in the early game. This is where we've been. Now let's take a look at a few of the roads that we could take going forward with set 2. So we're going to start off with what I tend to see most often played for a turbo to 15 build, and really nothing that surprising. You just keep pretty much everything the same. You max out on all of your pieces that soul charge. You make room for your new guy in Crimson Expeller. Crimson Expeller is fantastic for the turbo build and is something that I would like to see for Barrow going forward. Dark States in general, but especially for Barrow, in that not only does it soul charge for you, but it has utility within the soul as well, letting you counterblast one, soul blast it to soul charge another one and give plus 10k to your Vanguard. Also kind of helps extend those plays where you can simulate persona riding, which is really great. This is something I definitely want to see more of. I've personally been favoring a more slower build with Baromagnes just because I've not really had as much fun with the turbo build, just because a lot of your cards just soul charge and not much else. Granted, they serve in your goal of getting to 15 as soon as possible, but once you're at 15, you don't really have much use for them anymore. Keeping Engraver at a full 4 of because the card is so good. Still Brother Soul at a max copies just because it's soul charge too. If you're turboing, you really need it. And then we also have made room for our new card in Abnormality Extraction, which is pretty fan-freaking-tastic. It soul charges 3, although it only ends up being a net soul charge of 2, just because it then lets you choose a card from your soul and bounce back to your hand. This is something that I wanted desperately for Barrow in set 1. Kind of felt like Protoball probably should have been a Baromagnes card, or at least been able to be usable in both Bruce and Baromagnes. And now we have our version of that. Still not the most ideal. I don't like that it's discard to bounce back, but I guess I can see why they wanted it to be that way, considering you're able to toolbox literally anything from your soul for it. But this is another design space that I'd like to see for Barrow going forward, more toolboxing from soul, because I feel like this is the deck that would benefit from that the most, considering you soul charge so much and tend to just sit on it rather than soul blasting it all like Bruce. But hey, maybe that's why they didn't give it to Barrow in the first place and they're being a little hesitant with it. Still though, I would like to see more of it going forward. And also our new effect fronts. I'm personally a very big fan of these effect fronts. The 20k shield has been huge in my playtesting so far. Being able to just drop them down and be a 1-card guard for 33 has come up so often, and I couldn't be happier with it. Well, that is all for the turbo build. Now we'll take a look at a build that I'm definitely more favoring, and that is the get to 10 soul and then slowly get to 15 soul. I'm really appreciating this build just because it has more cards that do more things other than just soul charge, right? There's a little bit more moving pieces to it, and I really appreciate that. For the most part, it still looks a lot the same as the previous set 1 Barrow lists, but some key differences in that instead of running the full play set of Brother Soul, we're only running 2, and instead focusing much more on Crawl You Insects. Crawl You Insects is fantastic in this build because it lets us slap a ton of power on top of our units with on hits, and so it really kind of pressures our opponents into awkward situations where they have to sit there and choose between letting it hit and you getting some sort of effect off that pushes you further to that 15 soul, or they have to drop a PG or a ton of guard from hand and then minus themselves that way. This is what I've really been enjoying about playing Baromagnes, is that with Barrow's inherent crit and extra power, he also pressures with on hit, and so you can really kind of control your opponent's board and resources in this way because you're constantly forcing them into awkward and uncomfortable decisions. For the new cards that we're running here, other than the effect fronts, we have 3 copies of Freeze Breeze. Now, in a lot of the builds you'll see from Japan that this list is trying to emulate, they'll be running the promo grade 3 dragon. Instead, the executioner dragon, I don't know, I forget his name. All I know is that his skill is that when his attack hits, he lets you soul charge 2. So that's some great on-hit pressure for Baromagnes, and that's really where you'll get your mileage from Crawl You Insects. Unfortunately, I don't know when or how we'll have that promo available to us, so in its place, I'm running 3 copies of Freeze Breeze, which will give us much the same function in that it threatens with an on-hit. Not quite as good for the soul, at least, as that dragon, in that Freeze Breeze only soul charges 1 instead of 2, but it can also have us counterblast to draw 2 cards, which is really great in a deck like Baromagnes, where a lot of times in the early game, you'll be really low on hand and prone to rushing because you're dropping so many cards to get your soul charges. Lastly, there's also a one of tech in Javina. I personally really like Javina, and anytime I can make room for her in a deck, I really like it. Only really need 1, maybe 2 at most, because this is just for when you're pushing for game. This is a push for game card, mostly for when you have your excess of 15 soul, you can go into her and seal out a game, especially in those scenarios where your opponent may have their guard line set up to where they guard everything, but then they're planning to end the turn with 2 PGs in hand, so that way they can just drop each one for each of your big rearguard swings. Javina just makes it so that they can't do that play, and you can kind of seal games out in that way. Not the most important card, kind of a niche situation card, but I like having the option, and with the amount of soul charging we do, it shouldn't be too hard to have access to that when we need it. A third list I wanted to show off is one that I've been testing out lately. This one is kind of all over the place, and that's mainly just because I wanted to try and have a list with Baro that uses all of the new toys from set 2, and I've actually been having a lot of fun with it. Is it the most competitive / best way to play Baro? I'm not really sure. Needs a little bit more testing, but still want to put it out there so that you could try and make use of this if you wanted to. Basically, take everything that I just said about the last 2 decks and then put them together, because we're running the Javina, we're running the Freeze Breeze, the Abnormality Extraction, and we're running the Crimson Expeller. This deck can turbo to 15 if it needs to. It can bring it back to a slower pace and just play to 10 soul instead. It has a lot that it can do, and it also has the addition of Cleave Muddler. Now, I know a lot of people are kind of down on Cleave Muddler, and I can understand why. Its cost is kind of high, especially in comparison to something like Selfish Engraver, who's already in the deck and does what we want it to do in that counter charge. But Cleave Muddler has some important distinctions that I think warrant it being at least considered for your deck lists, in addition to Selfish Engraver. I don't think Selfish Engraver is getting pushed out of the deck anytime soon, and I know that's where a lot of the negativity came from for Cleave Muddler. People were like, why would I run this when I already run Selfish Engraver? And that's just it. You don't run Cleave Muddler instead of Selfish Engraver. You run Cleave Muddler along with Selfish Engraver, because at the end of the day, more counter charge I feel like is good. And what sets Cleave Muddler apart from Selfish Engraver is that Selfish Engraver's on-hit soul charge is mandatory. As you find yourself later in the game, once you've reached your 15 soul, you'll probably find yourself calling out a Deep Sonicer and a Selfish Engraver to get that counter charge back so that you can keep pressuring with Baro's skill turn after turn. Unfortunately, Selfish Engraver, with that on-hit soul charge being mandatory, that can be to your detriment the later in the game it gets. And a smart player, once you're at 15 soul, if they can safely take the Engraver hit, they're probably going to, because then they can force you to soul charge over soul charge, and then that just puts you closer and closer to deck out, and then that can kind of create an alternate win con for your opponent. That's where Cleave Muddler comes in, because Cleave Muddler does serve a similar function to Selfish Engraver in that he gives a counter charge, but he also gains power. And this is important because unless you Persona Road, Selfish Engraver, even with the extra 10k from Baromagnes, is getting completely shut down by a single defensive trigger. Meanwhile, Cleave Muddler, on the other hand, will end up being 25 and will hit over that defensive trigger. So that can make a ton of difference if you don't have double Deep Sonicer to call out from your soul to push for a game. So that's my case for Cleave Muddler anyway. I know a lot of people are down about that card, but I don't think it's the worst thing. I think it definitely has its uses. well, that is my gambit of Baromagnes decks for the set 2 meta onwards. These are just the most prevalent decks that I've seen topping lately for Baromagnes, and definitely just kind of take these as an outline or a guideline and kind of like pick and choose bits and pieces from each and kind of shape them to your own ideal deck. The first two, definitely the most competitively viable and probably the ones most worth your time, but I also wanted to throw some weird ones out there too, because you should know by now, here at the TIE Fighter Vanguard channel, we're all about the memes and the weird and the fun. So hope you give one or, you know, all of these a try if you'd like. I'd also like to shout out to the Cardfight Con guys for having me, because that was a ton of fun. And if you can, and the VODs are still live, definitely go and check the VODs out from the tournament on Twitch if you'd like to see some really fun games. And hey, you know, while you're also over at Twitch, give me a follow too. Go live every Tuesday and Saturday, and we talk Vanguard. We have a really fun time. We play video games. It's just great getting able to chat with you guys, and I have a lot of fun doing that. So if you feel like it, go ahead, drop a follow there. Come say hi sometime. Have a good time. Anyways, that is going to do it for me. Let me know what you guys think. Like, comment, share, and subscribe. All the typical YouTuber things. Really does go a long way in helping me out a lot, and I appreciate you a lot for it. But yeah, that'll do it. Until next time.